Okay, I'm gonna hit it. Actually, let me start over. All right. Hey,
Okay.
friends. Welcome back to the Peace Now podcast. We're creating a community of spiritual activists who are interested in helping make the world a better place, one breath at a time. And I am so lucky. I'm with my a new friend, Hector. Been talking just a little bit. And Hector, I've been immersed in your work for the last few weeks since we've been talking via email. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great. Thank you. And thank you for the invitation to dialogue.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah.
yes.
I'm so excited about it, Hector. And I'm wondering, we've been doing this thing at the beginning of our episode where we ask guests, what has been absorbing you recently? Like, what's been on your heart? What have you been working on? Like, what's going on in your life right now?
Well, I guess now we more than ever, I guess we're aware that we live in a web of life and that everything that is happening in the world, if we have our eyes open, our ears open, our heart open, affects us in one way or another. And as we celebrate with family and friends the holidays, you know, the
Mhm.
Holy Land is being
Mm.
transformed into a place of incredible blood and genocide and unbelievable atrocities, and we are all participating in that. In my case, I have been holding space for some people, both from Israel and Palestine, mostly people who live outside of the territory and people who are against the occupation and everything that is happening there. But just holding space to listen to the stories, atrocious stories of what is evolving there. And also the way the world leaders have decided to participate. I mean, is not a surprise the US participation in justifying what is happening there, especially the actions of the Israeli government. But it's incredible the silence of most of the governments of the world. And at the same time, I'm always surprised by how slowly but with more and more strength people in the world react, and we all said this is not possible. We cannot allow this to continue happening. But I felt it's both expressions of the collective trauma that we are all living as a humanity, as a human race, and the thing that we need to pay attention to. And as this unfolds, also what is happening with nature and what is happening with the collapse of meaning somehow
Mm.
for most people. This year, I lost three friends to suicide,
Mm.
and I witnessed also how this is increasing everywhere. The despair, uh, the feeling that we don't understand why we're here or what is our role. So anyway, all of this is occupy me as I receive friends and family here in the house and try to bring some joy and connection.
Yeah.
But like in the immediate, but in terms of my work, I don't know. We talk a little bit about this. For the last 5 years since I returned to Colombia from exile, I have been involved in a project called Reconectando, and we accompany the work of the Truth Commission here in Colombia, using or combining deep ecology or the word, mostly the word that reconnects of Joanna Macy, with my work with theater and to create spaces for collective imagination, for looking at the issues that we don't know how to resolve and using imagination to address them. And then developing, creating healing rituals with the people that we have been working with, mostly ex-combatants from all the different groups that have engaged in the war here in Colombia, and also with their victims, And so it has been a fascinating work taking people to deep places of deep nature, of
Mm.
wild nature, and witnessing what happened to all of us as we enter into a waterfall or we enter into a place with ancient trees, or we enter into a place where communities, indigenous communities, had been surviving and enduring all kinds of attacks by everybody, by government, by armed groups, and they continue holding their territories and holding their sacred traditions. So yeah, that's mostly some of the things that are feeding my soul right now.
Thank you, Hector. Yeah, talking about what's absorbing you, and there's a lot going on right now. And I want to really dig into your work with theater and the work that reconnects and the activism you're doing. But I just wonder if we could linger on that point you made at the beginning, like just on a more broad level. You mentioned that we're all connected. That you notice that your work um, bearing witness to what's going on in Israel and Palestine specifically, in some way, like I'm seeing a thread that somehow, maybe you could help me identify this thread. There's a thread somehow between bearing witness to that and the facilitating you're doing, and the point about us being interconnected, and then also this grief that you're feeling with your friends and the loss of meaning. And so I was feeling like there's some kind of constellation there. I wonder what associations come up for you when you think of those kind of three distinct but somehow connected elements in your life.
Yeah, I feel that I mean, since very early in my life, I was surrounded by a great deal of violence, of social, political violence here in Colombia. So since I was a child, I saw people dead on the streets as I was walking to school. And all of a sudden, I would see a man that has been shot or stabbed to death. And then you just supposed to look at it and go to school and learn. And as I became more and more aware of what was happening in my country, as the different guerrilla groups, and then the paramilitary groups, and then the mafia and their
Mm.
workers, and then young people becoming paid killers for the mafia, and the army, and the police, and the corruption. So violence was always very present in my life. And therefore the question of why are we killing each other? Why is this happening? Was always a constant in my interest to understand, and not only what was happening, but also how to survive it, because eventually it entered my own household. One of my brothers was taken by the government, and then I was taken by the Colombian government, accused of being a guerrilla fighter, which I wasn't, and torture, and many of my friends disappear. Um, until the moment in which I decided to leave the country. I said, I am just here working as a therapist, as a psychologist, and doing theater, which was my main passion, but just waiting to be killed and not even knowing by who. So pain and suffering and collective, the expressions of the collective trauma of my society and the world was always in my awareness. But at the same time, the need for healing and the need to find meaning and the need to find ways to process all of this information. And I feel that that's where not only my studying of the psyche, psychoanalysis, and all the different theories that I was very interested in, but mostly using theater and art to transmute what was happening, not in a mental, psychological way, but through my body. And my interest in embodied knowledge, and my interest in activism, and my interest in how all these things that are happening in the world are affecting me and the people around me. But then lately, the last 10 years, since I met Joanna Macy in Northern California, and I took a training of the World That Reconnects, and yet my initial connection was very intellectual, you know, and yes, embodied because I did theater and we sang songs and all of that, but it wasn't until I returned to Colombia and literally planted myself back in this land and started living not in the city, but outside of the city. And I started putting my fingers on the soil, and planting food. And the pandemic was an incredible gift for me because I was able to exercise every day, eat what I wanted and what I cook, and plant seeds and plant trees and plant flowers and plant beauty. That connection to the world of nature and the reconnection to it has been a huge transformation in my life. But in all of that, suffering and pain and violence has been a constant. And my interest in what is going on in the world through wars and the destruction of nature that is everywhere. So maybe, yeah, all these constellations, but at the same time, resiliency and beauty. And what I observed here in this place where I moved, uh, there were only big trees here that had been planted for wood, but now in just 5 years, this looks like a forest
Wow.
of trees that I had planted. And in 5 years, the way nature recuperates is unbelievable. And I feel that now also with my work, we talk a lot about the mycelium as this network that connects the roots of the trees and connects every living being in nature. I feel that our work is conjuring the connection of the mycelium of the soul, is how from all this suffering and all this pain that humanity has endured, we can learn something, and transform that into something that we still don't know what it is this only being that refuses to blossom, which is human beings. So I don't know what is at stake for us after eating the world, because we had devoured the world. So if we use Psyche and the butterfly as the metaphor, I wonder if we have been eating the world because some kinds of winds are spiritual winds or whatever is going to happen. This evolution of humanity um, is waiting for us, and I really I don't know how to describe it. I don't have any idea what it's going to look like, but at least a humanity that is more interested in life
Mm.
and the preservation of life and and um, and life for everybody, Um, and I had no idea if I answered your question or or
Absolutely, Hector.
something
Yeah.
happened there.
One of my, I'm noticing as I watch some of these interviews, I ask very open, not very direct questions. So don't worry about
Yeah.
answering them. I tend to just throw out words and people bounce off them. But yeah, speaking of that, a couple of things that are really connecting. I mean, everything you said was really connecting. First of all, your story is so gripping and moving, and your response to it in particular, is just so inspiring. And one thing I think about as like kind of a value or something that gives me meaning is the places of despair, like an image of being kidnapped and tortured. This could lead to despair, and you've been able to really transmute that into hope, and give me a sense of hope as you're talking just now. In the image of, you moved, I found it very symbolic and beautiful. Like you've moved to a place that was mostly monoculture, right? It was just one
Yes.
thing, and just in very short amount of time it has become rich. And this is inspiring to me
Mm.
because, and talking about them, and it brings me a sense of hope, because you're talking about mycelium. Here we are, you're in Colombia. I'm in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, in the west coast of the United States. And
Yes.
yet, I do different cultures, different background. And yet, I feel very connected to you as you talk about suicide. And as we're just losing every day people to suicide and overdose. That's a lot of what initiated this podcast project,
Mm.
because of the heroin crisis going on in my community right now, and trying to do that work and realizing that something more spiritual, and we need to do activism, that the psychological therapeutic approach is just, it's falling a little short. And so you mentioned, kind of building off that, Hector. So you've been working in theater for a long
Mm.
time. And you talked about embodied knowledge. and its connection to the psyche. So can you tell us like what that looks like? And if you want to use the case study, I saw a very moving performance of you working with some of your personal trauma
Mm.
that is on the internet. I'm blanking on the name of that performance, but it's a very
Night Wind.
Nightwind,
Yeah. Yeah.
extremely gripping, and we'll put it. I really suggest that people make the time to watch that. Um, but can you talk about maybe how this methodology has been working for you, how this practice, maybe the ritual too, and if you want to use your personal experience as a case study, that's great, or any case studies that come up.
Well, when I was younger, I discovered literature. When I was 8 years old or something like that, an aunt had books that she received every month and novels mostly. And I started reading them and was able to escape the reality that was surrounding me in literature. And the way I absorb literature is that I somehow became the characters in the novels as a way to connect to people. And I found that fascinating. And it came very easy for me. And then I discovered theater in high school and I started portraying characters that were very different to me. And so that offered me another way, not only to escape, but also to connect to people, to mostly to girls. It was the main interest. And to and to connect to the we were surrounded by people from the left. All the leftist parties groups were looking for young people who were activists and who were starving for action like me, but I could not connect to their discourse. I found it so repetitious and simplistic. There was no imagination in it. Uh,
Mm,
so I was not able to connect to any of the lefty groups, although I participated in many, many actions. Um, but I continued doing theater, and I felt that theater saved my life, literally. Not only because of the kind of activist that I became, it saved me from joining any of the many guerrilla groups that seek my participation. And somehow this idea of doing revolution on the stage seduced me. Like we use art as a way to think about life. In my personal life, when I was in university, a part of me wanted to use theater to experience what I was studying. And since I was studying psychoanalysis and psychology, um, I started developing characters that allow me to go on the streets as a street psychotic and experience what a street psychotic went through every day. How, for example, people would not look at you and you could be masturbating in front of people and people would not notice because they don't look at you. You don't exist. And I was always fascinated following these people, these characters, and then use theater to become one of them.
mm,
And it filled me with lots of experiences. And the way I wrote in school in college was through those experiences. So I created a series of monologues and characters that will allow me to go into the streets at night and be with the street kids, be with the psychotic people, be with what otherwise would have been very dangerous environments for me as a person. But as a character, I felt very comfortable in these places. When I got to the United States, for example, the first character I created was inspired by an airplane that fell in New York. It didn't explode, and I think two people died. But there
mm,
was a guy who had cocaine in his intestines in inside condoms. And just reading that news inspired me to do a short play about someone who has condoms full of cocaine in his intestines. And the CIA, the DEA is interviewing him, is interrogating him. And what he sheds is the history of Colombia and the history of drugs between Colombia and the United States, etc. So theater was always a very powerful way for me to deal with what I was dealing with and interested in. Then I met Augusto Boal and Theater Audio Press, and I started doing theater with people who had never done, who were not actors. I did a lot of plays and directed and wrote, etc. But I became very interested in the use of theater as activism but not a kind of activism in which we tell people what to do with their lives, but we engage through theater in asking questions about the things that we don't know what to do with, that we don't know how to resolve. And therefore, it was a way to engage in collective wisdom and collective imagination and find ways to discover that we all have agency, that we all can do things by entering on stage, like in forum theater. We do a play that asks questions, and then people become expert actors,
Yeah.
break the fourth wall, enter into the stage, and try something. And then as a therapist, I was using a lot of psychodrama and drama therapy because it was like a very obvious bridge between psychology and theater. But I started using mostly the techniques developed by Boal in Europe called rainbow of desire and caps in the head, the policemen, the voices that we have in our head that don't allow us to be who we want to be and force us to be what we don't want to be. I mean, this is a very simplistic way to say it. But all the time I use this also as an act, as a form of activism. Because when I was working as a therapist with people with AIDS and HIV 30 years ago, I used theater for them to tell their stories to the community, larger community, of what it was like to be a person infected or affected by HIV and AIDS. And then I started working in prisons with gang members in prison in the United States, especially in California,
Hmm.
and use theater for them to tell their stories and their dramas and their issues. But it was also an incredible platform for healing. So I always say that I have been a better healer when I use theater than when I use the theories of psychology, although they are very important too. But so I was not offering at the end healing to people or therapy, but what we were doing was very therapeutic, was very transformative. Because when you do art, when you use theater and people tell their stories, it's a way to own their story, not to be a victim of their story. So the play that you mentioned, Nightwind, was my reaction to the kidnap, uh, torture, and killing of my brother, Juan Fernando, here in Colombia. And at the same time, it was 9/11, and the Bush and Cheney administration started using torture and they call it enhancement interrogation techniques, but they were torture, waterboarding, electricity, sense deprivation, etc. And so I created a play that was my way to deal with the assassination of my brother and to deal with my reaction to the Abu Ghraib photographs, for example, these photographs taken by soldiers, US soldiers, while torturing Iraqi and other prisoners in Iraq. And so it was my way to transform, to transmute the pain that I was feeling. And paradoxically, when I opened the chamber of torture, the world came in and I started traveling. And I performed that play in more than 200 cities in over 54 countries. But I wasn't planning that, but it just happened like that. It allowed me to go to many places, many universities, many countries, work with people on their equivalents in their countries of what torture the play was talking about, this human drama, this dehumanization. And then I started doing workshops all over the place using theater. I stopped working as a therapist in the United States, although I was doing very well. And I began to travel the world until I discovered that what I was doing was training myself to return to Colombia. I wasn't planning it, but it happened like that. Um, because I ended up mostly working in war zones and places of deep violence, using theater to ask questions, to invite us to reflect on life, because theater has always been the place where we reflect on our lives, the mirror of our life. And the beautiful thing about Augusto Boal's techniques is that he says if you don't like what you see in the mirror, you can break it and enter and change it. So theater became like a stage for revolution, like a
Mm.
place to rehearse for transformation.
It's brilliant. It's so very excited to explore this methodology more. I mean, there's so much in what you were saying, Hector. So I guess one theme that's coming up, I'm wondering what direction to take. I'm actually wishing we had the audience participation is great. Like there's like an
Yeah.
improvisational, but I'll like think of there's two threads coming up in my head. I'll start with this one, the imagination.
Hmm.
This seems like when you were connecting with your like it was hard for you to connect with the leftist discourse in Colombia because it kind of lacked imagination. And I can kind of feel that in some of my activism that I'm doing as well. There can be a very fatalistic quality to it.
Mm.
So it can be like, oh, things are very determined maybe by class or very structure. The structures seem to be overwhelmingly powerful. And then also sometimes in our field of psychology and therapy too, there things can be we can be trapped by the brain
Yes.
or poverty. We can be so we can lack imagine. So I think this imagination is super it's interesting. That's kind of theme that's coming up. And then especially through your work in theater, it even allows you to imagine a new ego or a new personality, which is helpful if the our personalities are biased or like it was hard for you to connect with and empathize with some of the people you're working with. So you're able to become them literally to help with the empathy. And then also, if we're having mental health issues, I just will tell you this quick story. I
Yes,
was,
yes.
it got me interested in drama therapy. It actually is kind of circuitous, or it's kind of probably synchronistic that we're led to this. But I was in an Uber in America,
Hmm.
and I was telling the Uber driver we were having a nice conversation about my work in addiction, and he was like, "Oh, I'm an actor, and I played someone who had addiction and I developed an addiction. He did a very good job. He became that character and the addiction followed him outside of the role. And
Mm.
of course, this was troubling to him. And then he came up with this technique. He was like, I want to be, he created his own character. It's like, I want to be a very peaceful, enlightened, happy person. And so he created this character and became like, lifted his mood and like it really worked for him. But there's something about making the character, it's easier to step out of the identity for some reason. It was just so fascinating to me that it opened some kind of portal to transformation that's hard to just go. I'm so attached to being Brian, it's hard for Brian to be happy and peaceful. Um, but maybe a character could become, and then of course that would have residual effects on Brian. So I don't know if maybe you can riff on that, like the imagination, and maybe like how can we invite people who don't have this acting training into this art form? I'm curious, like maybe can we talk a little bit about that?
Well, maybe I will start by the end, and is
Mhm.
that I have done probably, I don't know, 100 short plays, foreign theater plays in the last 10 years, and mostly with people who had never seen a play, who did not know that theater existed. But we are all constantly acting. We are all constantly performing. I am performing right now how to answer your questions. You are performing to be, I mean, we perform many roles in our lives and we are faking it until we make it, as they say. We, when we study psychotherapy, we study all kinds of theories that might seduce our brains. But the moment the client or the patient enters the room, you have to throw all of that if you really want to be of service by just listening to what the person who comes, who thinks that you are the one who knows, but the only thing you know, if any, is that the one who doesn't know is the one who thinks they don't know, but is the only one who knows, that you don't know anything. They are the ones. And and there is very little imagination nowadays in therapy, in education, in activism, and I feel that imagination is our stronger asset as humans. The capacity to imagine a different world than the one we're living in. So when I work with activists, what I did, I created giant puppets, I did plays, I created characters that somehow could channel what was in discussion at the moment or what was present at the moment, and then invite people to respond to that, not tell people what to think. Um, when you engage in being against something, you don't need imagination. Against the government, against war, against Trump or whoever, or Obama, against communism or socialism, against anything, you give all your power to that which you are fighting against. My question was, or my invitation to myself and to the people I work with is, if we don't like what is there, then what we can offer, what do we want? And that puts us in a different place. That makes us or invites us to imagine what is the world that we want to create if we don't like what we see around. And right now, everywhere we look needs to change. All the ecological systems that supposedly support life are collapsing. All the socioeconomic systems are collapsing. And then the collapse of meaning, as we started speaking at the beginning. So everywhere we need to reimagine the world. And I felt that the pandemia or the pandemia was an incredible opportunity for us to see that, because so many things collapsed. There were no airplanes in the air. Most factories were closed. Uh, Things that were thought impossible happened. And it's amazing how rapidly it happened through the control of the media, etc., and the fear of that. But then it gave us this opportunity to look at ourselves and to look at what we were doing in the world, to look at the destruction of nature, to see how nature started coming. Wild animals visited the cities. It was fantastic. It was incredible what was happening. At the same time that many people were dying. I don't think because of the virus. I think because of other things. But uh, but the opportunity for us to see that as an invitation to look at ourselves and the world we were living in, and then it disappeared in less than 6 months, and we were all went back to normal. That was never normal to begin with. And it shocks me that we miss such an opportunity, but who knows what is going to come next, that to try to awaken this being that is so disconnected from everything. Imagination allows us to reconnect. Imagination connects both hemispheres, and logos and mythos, or logos and intuition, or brain and heart and body can connect through imagination. Imagination is connected to any ritual, which is the place where somehow the communion between the natural world and the human world take place. So we need a lot of imagination to reintegrate all these things that we have been told that were separate. We have been living in this story of separation for so long, the separation of human and nature, and human above nature, the separation of masculine above feminine, the separation of logos and mythos, or logos and intuition, and logos, but all of this is now collapsing, and we are in a moment of incredible integration. So my work is mostly through games. When I meet any group, the first thing we do is we play games. And yes, the games become more and more sophisticated, and theater playing is a game with certain conditions, But every time I create a play with people who had never acted before, we start with games, we're going through image theater, we start getting like embryo scenes, and then we put together whatever emerges during our encounter, and we put together a short play that asks questions, and then we invite the audience, hopefully people from the same community that created the play, to intervene in the play, to become actors, and replace the characters and try different things to transform the realities that those characters are experiencing. All of this is conjuring imagination. It's no one telling people what to do with their lives. They are the experts in their lives, and they are the ones who, through collective knowledge and through collective imagination, can transform it. And action, Yeah.
It's so good. Yeah, I think that's such a brilliant segue into the second stream I wanted to ask you about from earlier. So like I was really struck. So with that that practice of like the image theater and this creation that we could do, it struck me that when you were healing and making sense and processing the death of your brother and the violence that you were subjected to, and it was weirdly resonant with what was going on in Iraq, Afghanistan. And there was something almost energetically similar. And there was, in some way, your intervention, like when we're talking about mycelium, your intervention in some way was in response to not only your own experience, but also the collective experience of this violence. And in some way, they rhyme or resonate. And then when you would go and travel, people would connect with their experiences, and in some way it's reconnecting, and that's obviously the name of your work. So it's just so fascinating to me. And as I talk, I think about my friends and comrades here who have died, police brutality. I actually think a lot about my ancestors. It's a little different, but my ancestors, were really worked in steel mills and mines, and it was more very physically demanding and torturous on the body under capitalism. Thinking about them as we're talking, it's a form of torture, not quite the same. It's not state violence, but it's capital violence.
Yes.
And I'm thinking about that as I do dance work. And I think about them often because I'm so privileged to have the freedom to move, and my working. It's a huge privilege for me. And but anyways, I'm thinking about it. It was really striking to me. So I kind of agree with my kind of reflection there. Do you see it like that? Like as you're this kind of connecting the practice you're doing and the mycelium, and how we could maybe even respond to something like Israel or the oppression of Palestine by making sense of our experiences of colonization and violence in our communities. Like maybe could you riff on that with me, Hector?
Oh, I like a lot what you're saying. It's illuminating things that I had not seen, I had not connected. And that's the beauty of deep listening, is that I don't know what's coming out of my mouth. Some things I'd said before, but others are coming out right now. And I think what you're naming is this effect of what wants to emerge from our conversation, what wants to emerge from when I go to a group. And yes, I have a lot of tools in my bag that I have collected over the years and methodologies and things. But once I am in the group, I am at the service of what wants to emerge from the alchemy of us being together, Because imagine everything that needed to happen for you and I to talk today. Lots of things, even prior to our birth. And that fascinates me, is how are we at the service of the emerging future? And Theory U has been, the work of Otto Scharmer has been very illuminating in that way. And yes, I think that somehow life, through my pain, the pain I was feeling with the assassination of my brother, and then it brought me back to my own experience of torture. I became very post-traumatic in some ways, because I was in such deep pain. But then art allowed me to transmute all of that. But I wasn't planning, oh, I'm going to do a play to travel the world, and then I'm going to stop being a therapist, and I'm going to, no, it started happening through me. But what we need to do is to become vessels for that which wants to to be created. So we are co-creators of life. So I am creating it as much as it is creating me, and I feel that we have forgotten that when we create these very scotomized, very rigid theories to understand the world, and think that logic can be the only thing that can explain life, et cetera, we forget that everything is talking through us. When we do Reconectando with people, yes, we bring methodologies from the work that Reconnect, and my friend Ellen was the one who brought the work that Reconnect to Colombia, and then we came together, and I brought my experience with the work that Reconnect, but also with theater and ritual, and many other people have come to work with us, and every time they are enriching the experience that we can offer communities through this invitation to reconnect. And if we are inviting to reconnect, it's because we are feeling disconnected, disconnected from our soul, from ourselves, from each other, and from mostly from nature, from life itself, from the mother.
Mm.
And but in nature, everything is connected, constantly connected. Life and death, life, death, renewal,
Mm.
regeneration. And I feel that we are operate like that as well. I remember Guattari and Deleuze and Guattari. I don't know if you remember those French philosophers
Oh,
that
yeah. Mhm.
that
Just-
were very critical of the work of Freud and Lacan because it was so linear. And they talk about the rhizoma.
yeah.
Yeah, and I see it also as the mycelium, is that we are being affected by this light here and by this method, this wonderful tool that we call the Zoom, and the plants that are here with me, breathing with me, etc. And we have forgotten that we are at the service of something bigger than us that wants to create life. Because that's something that I had learned more and more, is that life creates life. Life wants life.
Yeah.
And I see it as I plant things, and yes, they grow very differently depending on the the microorganisms in the plants, etc. I don't they are microscopic, so I don't see them, but there are trillions of them.
Yes.
There are trillions of cells in us. We are a garden of amazing biochemical reactions. And who knows who is speaking to you? Is it Hector and Hector's brain, or is it all this stuff that has happened to us?
Yeah.
And
Mm.
yeah, so I think that we need to go back to curiosity, which has is very connected to playing, and is very connected to imagination, and is what we had done since we were little kids. But it was castrated in most of us when we, paradoxically, when we enter education,
Mm.
because it's so subversive.
Mm.
Imagination is very dangerous. Even Einstein, perhaps the most incredible scientist, said imagination is more powerful than knowledge. He was always advocating for that.
Yeah. In that there can be a real reduction in imagination, and especially through Western education.
Hmm?
Um,
Yes.
I wanted to. Okay, so Hector, you were talking about your creative process. So letting the emerging future or the field, people talk about different things with this. Our hearts, the muse, we could talk about in many different ways. I would like the what's emerging, that feels really powerful to me. Or just what's alive even. So it seems like you have a real some of the medicine you're bringing into the world is an ability to really empty yourself and be filled with something that's emerging. And so just the example of becoming someone on the street, like that's that's really inspiring. Like you're able to really commit to that and do that. Can we talk about that creative process? I know people are different, but what's it like for you to kind of open yourself? To me, the word that was coming was emptying. um that's the word that came to me, but what's it like for you to be able to kind of be filled with what's happening and what's alive?
Hmm. Great question. I never, I never responded to that. So you are giving me threads to whip with, but not because I had the answer. But I think you mentioned a lot of it. I feel that when we improvise, we allow ourselves to be in the here and now. It is like the most, to be able to improvise, you need to be here with whoever is there, with yourself, with the environment, with another actor on stage. And you are at the service of the story that is going to be woven, interwoven by what the environment and the other actor gives you. You cannot pre-imagine what you're going to say, because then you cannot improvise. Then you're doomed. You're gone. Uh, so yes, is this capacity to be open, which is what we did as little kids.
Yeah.
Is this capacity to really play? Is this capacity to for curiosity, which involves cure? You know,
Ooh.
is this capacity to open, and I love how you say it, to empty ourselves from that which we think we are, that which we think we know, that we think we understand. We don't. And theater of the oppressed was also very important for me in that, because it tells us you are not the one who's going to tell people how to organize their lives or how to transform their lives. And in therapy too, in mostly in psychoanalytic theory, it was very clear that you don't know anything.
Mhm.
And 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 it was also very clear that if you really want to sit with someone, work on yourself. Because what holds the space is the work that you have done in yourself. It's
Mhm.
not theories or techniques or technologies that you carry. Yes, all of that is very useful. They are very important tools, and we are experts in tools. Everything around us are tools at our service. Well, we're just naked, but these are tools. The cell is tool. This is a tool. The computer, the technology of language
Mhm.
is amazing, powerful tool. Yet none of this defines who we are.
Mhm.
And you mentioned the ego a little bit, and
Mhm.
the ego is very important. I love
Mhm.
the ego, and I tell people develop the strongest ego you can develop. The problem is when you think that that's you,
Mhm.
because then you are in trouble, and you put a lot of people in trouble trying to protect that, because we cannot forget what John called the deep self, or that other thing in us that came to the world, that decided to incarnate and came to the world to bring medicine and to bring gifts to the world. And yes, some of us are very lucky to connect with that from college, and to perhaps our work is very closely connected to that. But most people don't have that opportunity, that luxury, and do things. I'm now that my age also trying to design a project called the second adventure of life.
Mhm.
For the first time in my life, in the last 4 years, I have been also working in companies. I never knew that companies existed. I could not imagine people giving 20 years of their lives to a company and loving the company. It was unimaginable for me. But now I am working in companies because they pay well also, and they allow me to do other things. But creating a bridge between the best practices from the social world and the companies, and and I see the loneliness and the difficulty of most people after um, they do retire, that they retire. Some
Mhm.
they retire and they die.
Yeah.
They retire and they just make lines to receive medication. When is an amazing moment to give medicine to the world. So the second adventure of life is an invitation not to retire, but to refire, to reconnect
Mhm.
to your fire, to your deep self, to that which you came to the world to give. So to become an elder, not an older, an elder that has some wisdom and medicine for the world, not an older whose only uh, possibilities to become decrepit, and and the older continues accumulating things in the world. The elder gives everything because knows how little we need to really be here. So it's some things that I'm thinking now to work with people to help them really see retirement as a possibility to perhaps provide to the world what they really came here to do, and to reconnect to the purpose. Well, there are many ways to name this, but um,
Mhm.
but you mentioned something that also the problem with the lack of imagination also is that we in the left, for example, or in the social, those of us dedicated to the social arena, not to making money, etc., just surviving it, uh, believe that we are in the good side, that
Mhm.
we're good people, and that the others are the bad people. And activism also divides us like that. And I feel that that doesn't help us change the world whatsoever. It helps us reinforce what is there. And because as long as we continue putting ourselves and thinking that there are the good people, us, and the bad people, them, thinking as us and them, is going to be very difficult for us to imagine something that embraces everybody. Yeah,
Yeah.
that so and for that we need imagination.
It's so interesting too. Yeah. Have you looked at Bayo Akumulafe's work at all?
Yeah, I have been listening to some of his work. Yes, not I don't know it that much, but I enjoy him a lot.
Yeah, me too. Yeah, we recently did an interview, and just one motto of his is like, what if how we respond to the problem is part of the problem?
Yeah,
Is like such a,
I
I think, a crystallization of what you're saying is sometimes it
totally
can,
resonate. Yes.
yeah, it can really, fighting might
Mhm.
not be it might seem like the right move, but maybe if it's reinforcing the
Mhm.
issue, yeah, and it's hard, it's because it's so natural, and there's like this conditioning that can happen, which maybe this is a good segue into the audience participation. Well, maybe before we get into that, can you tell the audience, can you describe, speaking of the audience, our friends who are with us, like in this ecology that we're developing, theater of the oppressed. So this has been what maybe like what is it, and maybe your story of connecting with it, because I do want to ask you about the audience participation aspect, but first maybe we can get some framing and context.
Yeah, very quickly. It's
Yeah.
a methodology developed by a Brazilian named Augusto Boal. I met him in Nebraska 35 years ago. And he had different moments. The beautiful thing about Boal is that he was never a Boalian. Like,
Yeah.
Christ was not a Christian, Buddha was
Yeah.
not a Buddhist, etc. So he was always reinventing himself. He started doing theater in Brazil. He wanted to do theater that was at the service of oppressed people and the revolution. But very soon he discovered that when they have ideas of what people should do, something broke them. And the only people who really can know what they want to do and had the power to do is the people themselves. So he
Mm.
developed a series of methodologies, image theater, which is an amazing tool to do a psychodiagnostic tool, because you create an image, any image, and people project, the group projects in the image different things, you know?
Mm.
So images are polysemic, like the signifier in psychoanalysis. A word is a signifier. It doesn't mean just one thing. It can mean many things
Yes.
depending on the connections. Then he started developing short plays called forum theater plays that ask questions about things we don't know how to resolve, in which the characters are called oppressed, not victims, and an oppressed person is someone who is trying to change the conditions of their lives. But in theater of the oppressed, in forum theater, the play is used as an anti-model. The play ends badly. But the audience watches the characters struggle to get out of the oppression or oppressions, whatever they are, racism, poverty, exploitation, etc. But then the character in the play is unable to do it. But that inspires the audience to imagine other alternative ways in which the character or characters could have done something else. So when we finish the play, which is often a 30, 40-minute maximum play, it's a short play, we invite the audience to
Mm.
talk about what they saw. And so they say, I saw this, I saw that. We are very curious of what they see. And then we ask them if they like how the play ended, with the drug addict in an overdose, with the battered woman being killed or heavily injured by the husband, the oppressive or the violent husband, whatever it is. And often the people said, no, we don't like it. And we said, well, if there is any moment in the play where you feel that the character could have done something else, or any of the potential people in the world of the character could have done something else to help the character. So people become spectators. They come on stage and replace the character, whoever they want to replace, and they try something. And the actors are trained to respond to that, not to let it fix it right away or change it right away, but to let it evolve, develop. And then we process every intervention with the audience, and it becomes a aesthetic dialogue, not an ideological dialogue.
Wow.
Ideologically, we can fix anything. Now we look at everybody and we use our reason to say, oh, she should do this, he should do that. But when you come on stage and you are the woman who is being beaten by the husband, and you had 3 kids, and your husband has taken your papers because you are not legal, and it's not that easy.
Hmm.
And somehow you love him, and somehow you have learned also to enjoy this thing of violence, and then remorse, and then honeymoon, and then great sex, or whatever it is, or you hate the guy, but you depend on this situation. So people experience empathy at its highest point because you enter into the world of the character, and then you have a different understanding of the actions that the character takes. But you can also try something else. So we all engage in this, and then we create a dialogue. We don't tell people what to do with their lives, but people experience with their whole bodies, not just their minds, different alternatives to respond to a situation that hopefully is a situation that is common to the group that came to see the play. So I did a lot of plays with immigrants, a lot of plays with AIDS and HIV, now a lot of plays with victims of the war here in Colombia, and all the trauma that has been left after the massacres, the disappearing, the people who had disappeared, etc. And then we show the scenes, we see the characters in conflict, and then we ask the question, what do we do? Because I don't know. But the dialogue creates a sense of agency in the community. And it's very beautiful also that I work with people who never imagined ever in their lives that they were going to be the protagonists of a play.
Yes.
So that alone is incredibly transformative.
That's
Yeah.
sorry, Hector. Was there more?
No.
Okay. I was going to ask you about that because that's actually a question I meant to ask and it floated out of my head.
Yeah.
So we were talking about emptying and creative process and improvisation. And I'm thinking about, because I started dancing about 6 or 7 years ago, and that was at the time foreign to me. And now I'm reaching a stage where people are, and it's all improvisational dance.
Beautiful.
And, it's very fun.
Yes.
A lot of fun, and I really enjoy it. And people ask me like, how is this happening? And I'm kind of giving them the term like have fun or just like be present or be open. And it's not really enough. It's like what, they're kind of like, they're wanting to get there, but they're stuck. And it's hard for me to really. So anyways, I'm thinking about you've been an instructor and doing workshops and theater of the oppressed. I'm assuming there may be some resonance with pedagogy of the oppressed potentially.
Yeah. For Freddie, yeah.
Yep. And so how do you go about, we talked about the stifling effects of education. Like, how do you help someone connect with this kind of medicine that you have in a way that isn't stifling? Like, how do we teach being yourself, basically? How can someone else?
By being yourself.
Yeah. Is that it?
I feel that the main way we all teach is by being who we are.
Yeah.
And especially when we are lost and we don't know what to say, just be authentic. Just say, I don't know. But I feel that, for example, I love playing games. I know hundreds of games, but I use like 10 games. I live my life with 10 games because they allowed me to take very quickly a group of people who don't know each other, who don't know me. Most of them have never seen me in their lives, but I start playing with them and we all become human. I don't know anything that humanizes a group faster than games. I don't know anything that democratizes a room faster than games, because we are no longer adults and children, men and women, Palestinians and Israelis, Hutus and Tutsis, UDF, UBF, and IRA in Northern Ireland. We are just people playing. We're not Mara Salvatruchas on 18th Street or Crips and Bloods in LA. No, we were young people playing together. Now, it's not easy at the beginning to bring people to play or to dance.
Yeah.
It's very, because we are not being allowed to do that. That's for the dancers, that's for the actors, the trainer.
Exactly.
Yet every single human being has that capacity. And all of us, when we were children, regardless of the historic moment, the society that we belong to, etc., learn by playing. All of us learn to walk, to talk, to socialize, playing, performing. And so once you, through tricks, through exercises, through games, and especially never through judgment, you are not doing it right, you are doing it right, but holding everything that comes as expression of my way of being able to stay here in the room, even if I'm just on the side paralyzed by people screaming and moving and dancing, and I can hardly do this, but this for someone is a great dance.
Yes.
Just being, but you as a facilitator or as a holder of the space, if you can illuminate that as much as the guy who does the three, I don't know, the big dance, the choreography, etc., is as valuable as that person who is just barely sweating by standing up in front of the group. When you create a space where all of this is valued and seen and held together as sacred, then amazing things happen. Amazing things happen. When you are able to see the dance in every person, even the one who barely moves his eyes, and you put a light on it and you value it, not in a fake way, but you value it, because it will never occur to me to dance like this.
Yeah.
But for somebody, that is a lot, you know? And so in theater, the beautiful thing about improvisation is that it allows the expression that is unique to each person. So there is no right way of acting and wrong way of acting, right way of playing a game. Games are just to be played. They're not right or wrong, you know? So you find ways to create spaces for spontaneity, to create spaces for expression, and to do it in a way that you hold it all it together. I work a lot with gang members, and I work a lot in prisons and in high schools in LA that were prisons, and I mean, and literal prisons with cameras and metal detectors, etc. So to ask the young people to play, to be vulnerable in front of each other, it it forced me to find a lot of ways to connect to, first of all, the leaders in the group, and to connect to them in a way that they could feel comfortable making fools. But for that, I had to be the first fool. I had to be the first making gestures and saying stupid things. I use a lot to being Colombian and talk about Pablo Escobar and talk about all these horrible things. I said, what? You met Pablo Escobar? Yeah, yeah. And I'm doing some deals here with, I will say that in prisons, and, and it will allow me to connect to something, you know,
Yeah.
and to play with my story and to be who I am. And that was the best way for me to start connecting to groups. But playing for me is the most serious thing that we can do, uh, and 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 opening spaces with where there is no judgment. Because once you put yourself as you know how to dance and you don't, you are starting to create a lot of tension in a group. You know, as no, how do we dance? Each one of us dances completely uniquely because we are all unique. Nature only creates originals, not just zebras that are original or mango trees, humans also. So to bring a space for that expression is very important.
Yeah, it's really lighting me up. We first said it, and I knew it was important when you said like imagination or the theater of revolution. Like you used that term earlier. And
Mm.
it actually is really lighting me up now because I think this imagination we have to, I have a poster up. I really admire Martin Luther King Jr. a lot in the United States. And it has his picture and it says, dream another world is possible.
Mm.
I try to look at that every day and just really think of it. because I think is a very powerful idea. And it makes sense to me now more like from like the fact that we're not artists, I think is probably intentional on some level. Like the fact that there is such a thing as an artist, that it's a class that you tend to have to, go to a school in the US at least and be wealthy. That's a shift. Typically, our ancestors have gotten together and played in a circle, just played. And so it's a shift. And I think that's something, it is very radical for us to get together and create, because who knows what will happen. And that's like the danger and the excitement of it. Like, we might think up a new world and start living in it. Who knows?
Absolutely. And you know who is the most prolific artist in history?
Remind me.
Yeah, he continues writing.
Yeah.
poetry.
Yeah.
No, it is anonymous. Anonymous. Because the artist was supposed to be an expression
Yeah.
of something, a creation of beauty, and there's nothing more healing than beauty, in my opinion. And but then we transform it into something else, to sell it, to whatever, and to specialize it. Yet we all had that capacity. We all had the capacity to sing, not all of us at the opera, to act, to dance, to move, to write, to create a poem, to paint. Yes, we won't sell it, and no one will ask us. But it's like what a kid does to a parent. Anything they do is for a parent is like, wow, is magic, is divine, is beautiful, and they give it to you as an incredible gift, and they just did this, But yeah, so what we do is to bring back that fascination with our capacity to transform the world, to imagine a new world. And you mentioned something else. For me, art is that the new word that we use to call ritual.
Ritual.
And ritual is the place where humanity used to heal, is how we have been healing for centuries since we came here 200,000 years ago, but it looks like 40,000 years ago, something happened to the Homo sapiens, to our frontal lobe, to our capacities, etc., that no one knows what it was, how it was, but we are in that question. And what was discovered was art and dance and some kind of interpretation of the stars and what was happening out there, and the connection of people. We almost disappeared 40,000 years ago. Very few people were left, but they were forced to connect to each other, to live with strangers, to learn to new rules and new ways of deal with each other. It's fascinating how it evolved our cognition and also who we became. And today, when I work with people in the communities and especially in war zones using this forum theater, then I discovered that to create the place, a lot of stories came out, and stories of incredible pain and trauma and suffering and massacres and people having to leave Syria or any other country, most countries in Africa, leave everything behind. People who were internally displaced here in Colombia and other places. So what will I do with that pain? The play was a good way to deal with it, but it was not enough. All these stories, all these dead people, all these disappeared people, all this woundedness remain in the room. And that's when I reconnected to the power of ritual. And sometimes it was just singing together a song for all the people that were mentioned during the last week or last month. Sometimes it was lighting a candle in the name of those and singing a song and doing a little procession, etc. Sometimes we had the opportunity to bury objects as to symbolize those that were buried in our bodies. And then we said, no, we have to put them back on the earth. And now with Reconectando, after we hear all the stories of the war here, we just go paint our bodies with clay, or there are many ways to do that, and then go into a waterfall and ask the waterfall, take this skin from me, take it out, and I am reborn into a new version of myself, and a new identity, a new desire, at least a new intention to live my life in a different way. And since we work with a lot of ex-combatants, there has been no ritual for the people who spent 50 years in the jungle, and then they were asked to take the weapon that they could not even let go while making love, and now they had to keep their weapon. They take a photograph for the newspaper, and now they are no longer guerrilla. They are no longer identified with the warrior archetype, and they become citizens magically. No,
No.
we need to honor that work they did, whether we agree with it or not, and then welcome them back into society. But the problem is that most of Colombian society stay with weapons against them, you know, and we literally are killing many of them. Uh, so we need ritual, my friend. I feel that humanity is craving for us to return to that wisdom that we used to have in ancient cultures and some still in indigenous societies, and that's why probably these other ways of knowing this of new uh, these epistemologies, these ways of understanding life are coming back, you know, and that's why also psychedelics are coming back and now
Mhm.
are in use in so many amazing ways, and also some charlatan ways, but that's part of the
Mhm.
process. But it's, yeah, there is a renaissance of a lot of ways of understanding that are not logical, that are not theoretical, that are a different way of connecting to life and to everything. Well,
Yeah,
how things there, but it's
yeah, it's so good, Hector. Yeah, I think I'm so glad you clarified this connection with art and ritual. It's really interesting. I noticed, I'm wondering what you think about this too, because I think with playing, yeah, I think sometimes, especially in the West, we hear these words and maybe it evokes some certain images. But like I've noticed that in my therapy work, I started this year lighting a candle right
Mm,
before and just asking my clients, can we just take a breath together at
uh,
the beginning? Just a slow breath at the beginning and the end. And this has really transformed my focus.
mm,
I've become a much deeper listener. And then I've also been able to leave the session. Like when I blow the candle out, it's over, and I'm
mm,
able to leave and like recollect, even if it's very difficult. And I'm able to be very more resilient. I feel like it gives an ending and a beginning.
mm,
And I think so. I'm wondering, like, maybe talking to the audience too, is I think we know how to do this. Like it'll just come. You
mhm,
know, it'll just happen, and I don't think it has to be like super calm. I think sometimes it can be artistic and dramatic, but just that one small shift
mhm,
with things I have in my house that just came up intuitively. Like I was like, I want to focus when I was finding myself disassociating from my body, getting a little burnt out, and just a candle focuses me. It's very ancient. I'm focused with the candles on, and I don't know. Yeah, so I was making that connection. I hadn't really thought like, oh, I'm doing a ritual, but actually
mm.
you've elevated that. So I'm doing now, and I recognize I did intuitively create a ritual, and it served me very, very well. So thank you for just reminding me of that.
Absolutely, and it's a wisdom that is in our bones. We just need to remember it. And TikTok is not going to remind you of that. You know, is is in us, and it's beautiful. You are lighting a candle, and honoring the spirit on the person,
Yes.
which is how the Romans started doing that on the birthday. The birthday celebration was not for the person, was for the spirit in the person, what they call the genius.
Wow.
And yeah, and it's not the genius IQ of 100 and I don't know what. No, that each one of us has a genius, has a gift, has a unique way of seeing the world and something that we all brought to life. But it takes a while because we're infants and we need to grow and we need to survive in society and learn all kinds of things and then unlearn them and play with that until we discover how to give our light to the
Yeah.
world, our unique star powder. We're all star powder. We all come from that Big Bang or whatever mythology you want to use. But yeah, I love how you do it. It's yes, you are honoring something and it centers because
Yeah.
We are centering on that. And so self-generated rituals
Hmm.
are very important because also the meaning is given by you and the person. Somebody else comes in and say, "Oh, what is that?" It will not mean anything. In Reconectando, we always start creating an altar. An altar is like that place in which the other world and this world connect, and sometimes it breaks and the other world enters the room. Like nature also sometimes enters the room. It's beautiful how things happen, you know. And I'm paying more and more attention to that. I don't know what it means, but it's just notice that. Uh, Hummingbird just come in the center while we're doing truth mandala, and something has been said, and boom, a hummingbird comes from the outside, stays in the center, and goes.
Yeah.
I don't know what it means, but it's magic. And each one of us creates our own meaning out of this. So often in the altar, people bring things that mean something for them in their connection to nature or disconnection to nature. For somebody else who comes, they just see dirt and pieces of
Mm.
wood and rocks and dirty objects is trash. But no, for that group, the altar carries a lot of meaning because we are symbolic beings and we are the ones who give meaning to the actions that we take. And I feel that we are lacking that in the modern world and that we urgently need that to help us create meaning with each other.
I think I'm going to try to do something now that it should be interesting. It's going to connect a number of dots. So one that I think is quite funny. So the candle thing, like it's so funny, like that was self-generated and pretty not super intentional. It's just like seemed very obvious. And now you telling me this story of the Romans is a real synchronicity because how I view my work is that sometimes with this genius, I think we have it and it's so close to us, we don't even recognize it's a genius. Like we were just talking, and your ability to empty yourself, it's very natural to you. But to me, I see it and I reflect it back to you, and you're like, oh, yeah, that is something interesting. And I view, and sometimes I'll say something to someone and somebody will be like, hey, that was really interesting. I never thought of the world like that. And you bringing something to me. Thank you. And I'm too close to see that I'm bringing that. And even with the hummingbird, like there's something relational about our gene, it needs almost something to interact with to
Mhm.
emerge. And I just find like also there's this thing about the Joker that I wanted to ask you about and like the trickster. And I just find it funny that here we are. I'm an Italian man, I'm Italian heritage. I have no idea about this history of the Romans. You're a man from Colombia, we're talking, I'm living in Pittsburgh and you tell me about the Romans. And it's almost like there's a joke to it.
Yeah.
And so maybe could you talk, if you want to reflect on that, of course, too, but I wanted to ask you about the place of the joke, because I know you wrote about it in the text I read that you sent to me that I'll put in the show notes. But this role of the Joker in theater, what in the theater of the oppressed, what's that like archetypally or just in general?
Well, the Joker or the Coringa is
Mm-hmm.
how Augusto Boal call it in Portuguese, and in Spanish we also say Coringa, is the person who uses the methodology of theater of the oppressed and knows about games and improvisations, creates the play, directs it, and then is his main job or her main job is to be that bridge between the play and the audience. So it's right there. And the Joker, like in the cards, it's it has all the power and no power. You
Mm-hmm.
know. But the idea is that it's not that you now interpret the play or you now interpret uh, every intervention that people do. No, you are constantly asking questions for the wisdom of the room to emerge. Not yours, not your ideological construction about the topic or about what should be done about this. Yes, you can give your opinion, but just as that, as your opinion. But hopefully you are more interested in what is in the room and how to bring it out to theater through theater and through this encounter that you are facilitating. So the role of the Joker in theater of the press is crucial, is very important. I think it was somehow in psychoanalysis, especially Lacanian psychoanalysis, it was this idea of the dead bodies. There was this idea of the psychoanalysts not bringing their desire into the room. Although now I don't think like that. I do feel that that was a very interesting conceptualization of something. But I like this more as we said it before, like this being at the service of what wants to emerge that is beyond my understanding or anyone else's, and that can only come true when we really free ourselves from the trauma, from that which constantly keeps us looking back into the past.
Yeah.
And we bring it into the present, we integrate, so we free that energy that trauma holds and freezes in all of us, and we free it and put it at the service of the co-creation of life, put it at the service of transformation, of healing, of imagination, of innovation, if you talk in. So so a joker should be that person who is serving that purpose, not his or her own agenda, ideological agenda, although it's always there. It's not denying that we all have it, but it's hopefully put that into, well, the best way would be to empty oneself from the idea that we are the ones who know what's going on, and then really serving that which wants to become, to come into awareness for everybody, or conscientization, as Paulo Freire will say.
Mm.
No? And it's for both. It's for me as a joker or the actor or as the professional, and the audience or the group, or the patient.
It's almost like with the Joker, because something you said earlier really moved me when we were talking about dance, when you were able to elevate what's in the room and see what might be seen as like, okay, someone's doing breakdancing and they're doing this very interesting athletic thing. And okay, people are celebrating that. But then someone decided, in my fantasy, they were injured, or they just, something happened and it was a monumental effort for them to get there. Maybe it was their first time and they're so scared. And that
Right.
is actually so heroic and so beautiful, and it's missed because
Yes.
and you're able to actually see that and recognize it and elevate it, actually elevate. I was, that was the word, and see that person. Maybe it's verbally, or maybe it's just even consciously, is just that gesture of, wow, your presence is so important to what's unfolding here right now. And it's almost like if I have, or anyone has as a facilitator, a space holder, that kind of ideological agenda, it's just, we're too busy. We can't be open enough to see what's going on. If there's an agenda and there's a plan of how it has to go, how can we see what's happening? I'm just thinking, I'm
Yeah.
thinking of that in my work. I want to be able to see, what's happening. I think something that's funny, the Joker, it's maybe something with status too, because there's a status of being the leader. And so with that status, maybe there's a desire to stay on top. So it has to go as planned. But if I'm already the Joker, I don't have to worry about the status as much. And so I'm finding, I haven't done a ton of reading on it, but I'm finding it very evocative, the idea. And thinking of maybe a little, since we're talking about drama, thinking about Shakespeare and how the fool it's always such an interesting character.
It's the only one who can tell the truth to the king and not be decapitated.
Yeah, exactly. And he's got no power, but all the power.
Exactly. Yeah, it's a power that comes through, but that he or she doesn't identify with it. Doesn't oh, I am the one who had the power. No, things come through it, and in the form sometimes of humor, which is one of the most powerful powerful actions that humans can do. Is the most difficult thing to do, is to really the humus, the humor that make us human, that connects to the humus of the earth,
Yes.
And it comes through the jester or the joker or the clown, sometimes the sacred clown archetype, the hayoka in some native traditions. Is the one, the contrarian, the one who breaks the ritual so the ritual can happen.
Yes.
Which is another misunderstanding. Most people understand ritual as that thing that we repeat all the time. No, ritual is a completely creative act. And when people prepare for ritual for a year or more, they prepare not for it to come through perfectly. They prepare so it can break. And it's very beautiful when you are in Africa or not, some other places and something breaks, then they always say, oh, spirit just came in. So something exciting, something and that they have never seen before happen. So all their training, all their experience, all their is at the service of holding that complete unknown, you
Mm.
know? Or when Kairos enter and breaks
Iris, yes.
honor, the
Yes,
Kairos,
yes.
the eternal breaks, and then it's the moment of orgasm, is the moment of the birth of your child, and you cannot believe that this thing came out of that thing, that body is like wow, and it raised by itself and it cries and is the most beautiful. Or when you accompany you are a midwife to death, for me is also one of the most fascinating things, is when that last breath that is like eternal, and then
Mm.
goes and then you breathe again, oh, I'm still here, but this person is gone now. And yeah, those moments of eternity that are waiting for us, if we believe the poet, that every day there is a moment of eternity waiting for us, but it's hard when you are so busy with so much noise, with so
Mm.
much, invasion by the electronics and etc. It's very hard to be present in those moments.
And yeah, to listen, to this. Yeah, I really connect with this. Yeah, the Kairos imagery. And then as you're talking about birthing, it's actually a really interesting, maybe not even a symbol or a metaphor for art, like midwifing these creations.
Mhm.
So I think of like poetry, I do some writing, and sometimes it's 3 a.m.
Yes.
Like I'm awake, and it's like, but I got to be up at, got to write this down. It's here now, it's like it's come through. It's not necessarily on the agenda of the calendar for the next day, but something is emerging now, and it's sacred.
Is
Uh,
that's when you connect to genius. That is how
yes,
the Romans call it. Is the when genius erupts. It doesn't matter what time it is, or that you haven't eaten for 4 days. You are connected to something else that is using you to bring something into the world, and you are the midwife. You are the vessel for that.
love it. Yeah, that's a really powerful. I really try to think like that. I try to remember to think like that. It can be difficult with, like you said, busyness and space. I'm remembered. We're doing quotes. Favorite writer of mine, Leonard Cohen, the singer, says,
Yes.
"If I knew where good poems came from, I'd go there. I'd go there every day. It just comes." Uh,
Yeah.
okay, Hector, you've been extremely generous with your time. I just have two more questions for you.
Mm.
So the first one is, so we're in Pittsburgh, many of us, not all of us. We have got audience everywhere, but a portion of our group is in Pittsburgh. And so we're going to start, I'm just learning this now, but we're going to start practicing some theater.
Mm.
So for a new group getting together with not a ton of acting experience, what would be some of your basic tips to get started for a new group?
Play a lot.
Play.
Play and improvise and use the things you know. I always tell people when we're going to start doing improvisations is I'm not interested in interesting things. I'm interested in what you are interested in.
Ooh,
Because most of us, especially those who are intellectuals or are therapists or who are
yeah,
teachers, those of us who need to pretend that we know something,
yeah.
we tend to go for the big topics. For example, the climate crisis. How do you do a fucking play about the climate crisis?
Yeah.
Is or a dance. But a woman tells me I live near the river that is now not considered a river but a dead place because bodies had been thrown there. And I am at the end of the block, and people throw their trash into the river every day. And sometimes they throw it from half a block, so it falls into in front of my uh, my door.
Mm.
So every day I find trash, dead bodies of animals, dirty diapers, etc. And I had to take care of the 3 kids of my two daughters. So my house is filled with rats and cockroaches and things. And
Mm,
what do I do? Is that a play that we can do? Is that an
absolutely. That's a
interesting thing?
question. Yeah,
Does it has to do with climate crisis, with trash
absolutely.
management, with the of course. Now we can so play with what you guys are interested in, not what is
Yeah.
interesting. Yeah. And do a lot of improvisations and get to know each other and dance. Absolutely. Connect
I,
to your bodies. Yeah.
yeah, that's again, just to circle back, it's very cool because it's almost like a trust because we can intervene here. We have 3 rivers in Pittsburgh and we
Mm,
can't, it's one of my goals in my lifetime, to be honest, Hector, is I want to swim in the river.
yes.
We can't swim in the river. It's there's sewage and it's all kinds of pollution. And it's sad because people have swam in these rivers
Mm.
since and we
Not long
can't.
ago. Yeah.
Yeah. And so it's yeah, that's a very moving example to me. Yeah, and then but trusting, as you said earlier, that something by intervening here in some way it resonates or it rhymes, and by making progress or by intervening, yeah, and making a stand and putting that energy into the world in some way, it does ripple into these local struggles that are happening everywhere. Many people working with their rivers or their pollution, and we'll, yeah, I think we can trust that if we intervene on that level, that we can make some progress collectively and spread the mycelium.
And how does it affect you? It
Yeah.
starts, it's how the not being able to swim in the river, not being able to drink from the river, watching a river that smells horrible every day that we have transformed into a sewage. And what does it does to me, to my soul, to my body, to my heart? How does it hurt me? And from the pain is where beauty comes,
Yeah.
when we transform, transmute the pain. It's and honoring that
Hmm.
and not knowing. Absolutely. And then trusting the mix of all your hearts and
Yeah.
bodies connecting.
Yeah, it's exhilarating. And yeah, you said, as therapists, people like me, who my main defense mechanism is intellectualization. Like I like to know what's going to happen, so it's both scary and exhilarating to let go of the plan and just say, oh, what could happen. So it's exciting, and we are fortified by your words in Pittsburgh, Hector, so thank you. A very hopeful conclusion. I do want to ask one final thing. So you've been very, like I said earlier, generous with your time. How can we help you in your work? What's the best way for us to help you?
I think by doing the work that you
Okay.
want to do there.
Yeah.
No, I feel that we are all very help can be very helpful to the world by connecting to that which brings us passion and excitement and joy, especially joy. This is not going to change by having to do the revolution and sacrifice only in the sense of that which makes something sacred. That has
Mm.
to be the meaning of sacrifice, not this Christ-like uh, giving everything that we have and what we don't have to life because of a cause. I feel no, I no longer believe in that. So enjoy what you guys are doing. And of course, it's great that you follow Reconectando and see what we're doing. And if something vibrates with you, please connect with us and bring what you have. And I feel that more and more at now interconnecting from the light, that light that you lit when you see someone, and that the world is being illuminated in many different ways, that we're all awakening in a faster way at the same rate that apparently everything is collapsing. But I do believe that we are part of the co-creation of life, and that we are moving somewhere. I don't know where, but that moving is with what you love.
Mm.
Is continue doing what you love doing.
Hey, Hector, I just had an idea. Um, Completely optional. You don't have to commit, especially we're on air. It's not like a gotcha. But I was thinking, like, wouldn't it be fun if we played with for a season or 2 seasons or maybe a whole season? We played, and then we asked you to come back on and do a little retrospective. Do you think you'd be open to something like that?
And absolutely,
Yeah,
yeah.
we'll take good notes and see what emerges for us and see over the next year or so, because it's kind of fun. It's at the end of the year. So there's this energy of starting something new.
Yes.
I'm thinking, I've been reflecting. Been spending the last weeks reflecting, and I'm feeling that some of those traumas of the year, that energy coming back to me, and it's
Yes.
propelling me into the future. So I think this will be a fun. And we're thinking, we have a advocacy campaign we're working on called the Hope Agenda, which is to bring more hope. And I think it should be in theater. I think there's some new ideas emerging from this conversation. So we'll definitely know how I'll let you know how it's going. And y'all, definitely we will put the Hector's work, Reconando, is that how we say it?
Reconectando.
Reconectando.
Yeah.
Reconectando. We'll put that, and then some of your texts that are online, which have bring me joy reading them. So I'm sure they'll bring joy to the audience for reading them too. So we'll put that.
You can share the book also. The PDF is, if people
okay.
want. Yeah, of course.
Okay,
Absolutely.
yeah. I will definitely share that. I don't know where you're watching this, friends. You might be on YouTube, so it'll be in the description, or if somewhere else that I put it, it'll be somewhere near you. And so, Hector, I just wanted to say thanks again for doing this. It's been a real joy. And thanks for sharing your wisdom. Do you have any last words you want to share?
No, just a deep appreciation, and yes, this is a moment of end of the year for all of us, and it's wonderful what you're doing is to reflect on what is dying and what needs to die, and to honor that and to bury it, to give it back to the earth so we can be reborn, and which is usually it used to be what we did in these times, in ancient times. Now it's just what is it that we need to consume and eat and devour. But yeah, I think that the old meanings are coming back, and that we just need to listen to that and trust. And thank you, my friend.
Yeah, thank you so much, Hector.
Back with everything. And